There's something Kathryn Kuhlman never told you about. White feathers. Something she discovered in her final years of ministry. Something that completely changed how she viewed miracles. What if I told you that finding white feathers after praying Psalm 91 could be the most dangerous sign you could receive? I know this sounds impossible. I know everything you've learned tells you otherwise. But Kathryn Kuhlman learned this the hard way. It was 1974. Kathryn was in Pittsburgh. She'd just concluded one of the most intense services of her life. Over 40 people were healed in a single night. The power of God was so present that people were fainting before they even reached the stage. She went home ecstatic. She prayed Psalm 91 as she did every night. And when she awoke, there were white feathers scattered across her room. Her first reaction was one of gratitude. "The angels were here," she whispered. "They came to visit me." But 3 days later, something terrible happened. Kathryn began having visions she couldn't control. Voices she couldn't silence. A presence so intense she could barely breathe. She rushed to her spiritual advisor, a man who had studied angelic phenomena for decades. And it was he who told her the truth no one wants to hear. "Kathryn," he said, looking directly into her eyes, "the angels shouldn't be this close to you. You know that feeling when someone says something that shatters your entire world?" Kathryn felt that in that moment. "But they're angels of God," she protested. "How can they be too close?" And then came the explanation that changed everything. There's a difference between angelic presence and angelic interference, and that difference can determine whether you'll experience protection or spiritual chaos. I'll explain exactly what Kathryn discovered. But first, I need you to understand something about the nature of angels that no one tells you. Angels are beings of pure energy. Energy so intense that even their proximity can overload the human nervous system. It's like plugging a 110V appliance into a 220V outlet. The appliance wasn't built to withstand that intensity. Kathryn discovered that there are levels of angelic proximity, and each level has its signs, its consequences. The first level is distant presence. You feel peace, protection, a subtle sense that you're not alone. This is the safe level, the level where most should remain. The second level is active proximity. You begin to have vivid dreams. Synchronicity increases. You find white feathers occasionally. It's still relatively safe, but it already requires attention. The third level is where the problems begin. Intense proximity. White feathers appear frequently. You hear whispers. You feel physical presences. You have visions you didn't ask for. And there's a fourth level. The level that almost destroyed Kathryn Kuhlman. Angelic overlap. At this level, the barrier between the spiritual and physical realms becomes so thin that you lose control over what enters your life. The angels are no longer just close. They are overlaid onto your reality. Kathryn told me years before she died that during those 3 days she couldn't distinguish between her own voice and the angelic voices. She couldn't tell if the thoughts were hers or theirs. "It was as if I had become an open channel," she said. "But some channels were never meant to be opened completely. And here's what's most terrifying. Once you reach the fourth level, returning to the first is almost impossible without intervention. Do you want to know how Kathryn managed to come back? How she learned to regulate angelic proximity? She had to do something that goes against everything you believe about prayer and faith. She had to learn to say no to the angels. I know how that sounds. I know everything inside you is screaming that this is wrong. But listen, there's a difference between rejecting divine help and establishing healthy spiritual boundaries. Kathryn discovered that the angels themselves respect these boundaries when properly established. Because here's the truth. Angels are servants. They respond to appropriate spiritual authority. And part of that authority is knowing when to say, "Not yet," or "Not so close." But how do you know when you're approaching the third or fourth level? How do you recognize the signs before it's too late? Kathryn developed a list she shared only with a few close people, a list that can save your spiritual sanity. The first sign is the frequency of the feathers. If you find white feathers more than 3 times a week, especially after praying Psalm 91, you're entering the 3rd level. The second sign is invasive dreams, dreams that are so vivid that you wake up more tired than when you went to sleep, dreams where you have no control over what happens. The 3rd sign is the feeling of constant physical presence, when you feel someone is always in the room with you, even when you're alone. The 4th sign is excessive synchronicity, when everything in your life begins to align supernaturally, but you feel you no longer have free will. And the 5th sign, the most dangerous of all, when you begin to hear specific directions you didn't ask for. Kathryn told me she reached the point where she heard detailed instructions on where to go, what to do, who to talk to. And at first, these instructions seemed like blessings. But then she realized something terrible. She had lost the ability to make her own decisions. I became a puppet, she confessed. A puppet in the hands of beings who, although they were of God, didn't understand the value of human free will. It was at this moment that she sought help. It was at this moment that she learned about the spiritual cooling protocol. But before I tell you about this protocol, I need you to understand why white feathers after Psalm 91 are especially dangerous. Psalm 91 is not just a prayer of protection, it's an angelic invocation. When you pray this psalm with genuine faith, you are literally calling angels into your proximity. And the more you pray, the closer they get. Kathryn discovered that some people have a natural, angelic sensitivity. For these people, Psalm 91 acts as an extremely powerful spiritual magnet. You may be one of those people. And if you are, you need to know how to protect yourself. The protocol Kathryn developed isn't about rejecting angels. It's about teaching them how to interact with you in a healthy way. It's about establishing rules for divine proximity. Sounds impossible? Sounds presumptuous? Kathryn thought the same thing, until her spiritual advisor showed her something in Scripture that changed everything. Jacob wrestled with an angel and set boundaries. Moses told God he wouldn't ascend the mountain without specific assurances. Gideon tested the angel twice before fully trusting. The Bible is full of examples of people establishing boundaries with spiritual beings, not out of lack of faith, but out of wisdom. And Kathryn realized her terrifying experience happened because she had never established those boundaries. The angels came because she called them. They stayed because she never told them when to stop. And they overrode her reality because she never established rules for the interaction. But once she learned the protocol, everything changed. The white feathers still appeared, but only when she really needed confirmation. The dreams returned to normal. The angelic presence became comfortable instead of oppressive. And most importantly, she regained her free will. Years later, when other ministers began experiencing the same problems, Kathryn discreetly shared the protocol, but she always gave a warning. Once you establish boundaries with angels, she'd say, you also take responsibility for your spiritual protection. The angels will respect your limits, but you need to be sure you can protect yourself within those limits. It's a trade-off, control versus automatic protection. And not everyone is ready for that trade-off. Kathryn saw ministers who established boundaries but lacked the spiritual maturity to protect themselves. They ended up more vulnerable than before. She saw others who tried to set limits out of pride, not wisdom. The angels simply withdrew completely, leaving them spiritually orphaned. But she also saw those who learned the protocol correctly, who established healthy boundaries and took on mature spiritual responsibility. These people experienced something few know: conscious partnership with angelic beings, not subordination, not domination, partnership. And that changed not only their ministries, but their entire lives. Do you want to know exactly how this protocol works? Do you want to learn how to establish angelic boundaries safely? Do you want to discover how Kathryn transformed her greatest spiritual crisis into her greatest discovery? Because what I'm about to reveal will completely change how you relate to the spiritual world. It will give you control over experiences that were once random, but it will also require you to assume a responsibility that few are willing to carry. The responsibility of being a conscious partner of the celestial realm. Second part of the script. Continuation. But here's what Kathryn discovered that will shock you. The protocol doesn't begin with prayer. It doesn't begin with fasting. It doesn't begin with anything you'd expect. It begins with a declaration. A declaration she was afraid to make for years. I established the terms of this partnership. 6 words that changed everything. 6 words that transformed Kathryn from a victim of spiritual experiences into a conscious partner of the angelic realm. But wait, before I teach you these words, I need to tell you about the most terrifying moment of Kathryn's life, the moment that almost made her give up ministry forever. It was the 3rd night of that experience in Pittsburgh. The angelic voices were so loud she couldn't hear her own thoughts. The white feathers appeared constantly. And then, she saw something she shouldn't have seen. She saw the angels arguing about her. Not arguing about helping her. Arguing about controlling her. She's very sensitive, one voice said. We can steer her completely. But what about free will? Another asked. She's praying for miracles. She's asking for our intervention. Her free will has already been surrendered. Kathryn realized in that moment that there was a difference between asking for angelic help and surrendering angelic control. And without realizing it, she had crossed that line. The angels weren't being malicious. They were responding to what they thought she wanted. Total surrender. Total dependence. But Kathryn realized that this wasn't what God wanted for her, or for any human being. It was in that moment of absolute terror that she did something she had never done in her life. She told the angels to stop. Stop, she said aloud. I didn't authorize this discussion about me. I didn't agree to be steered. I asked for partnership, not control. And then, silence. Complete spiritual silence for the first time in 3 days. But it wasn't the silence of absence. It was the silence of attention. Like when an entire room stops talking to hear what you have to say. And it was in that silence that Kathryn heard something that changed her life forever. A voice, not angelic, not human. A voice she recognized as being from God himself. Finally, the voice said, you understand. Understand what? Kathryn asked. That you were created to be my partner, not my puppet. That even my angels need to learn to respect your spiritual authority. And then came the revelation that revolutionized everything. Kathryn thought about prayer, faith, and relationship with God. The angels are my servants, the voice continued. But you are my daughter, and a daughter has more authority in the Father's house than the servants. Do you understand what that means? Do you understand the revolution these words represent? Kathryn discovered that human beings, especially those in conscious relationship with God, have spiritual authority over angels, not because they are superior, but because they were created for partnership, not servitude. Angels serve, humans reign alongside God. But most humans never learn to exercise that authority. And when we don't exercise our authority, others take control, even if they're angels with the best intentions. That's how Kathryn developed the protocol. Not as a way to push angels away, but as a way to establish a healthy relationship based on appropriate spiritual authority. And now I'm going to teach you exactly how it works. The protocol has 5 steps. 5 steps you can use whenever you feel that angelic proximity is getting too intense. First step, recognition of authority. You say aloud, I recognize my spiritual authority as a son, daughter of God. I establish the terms of this angelic partnership. Step 2, defining boundaries. You specify exactly what kind of angelic interaction you authorize. I authorize protection and subtle guidance. I do not authorize control of my thoughts, decisions, or actions. Step 3. Establishing signals. You define how you want angels to communicate with you. If you need my attention, use inner peace, not physical feathers. If you need to alert me to something, use intuition, not audible voices. Step 4. Creating a privacy zone. You establish spaces and times where you don't want angelic interference. My bedroom during sleep is a private zone. My moments of personal decision-making are private zones. Step 5. Emergency protocol. You establish a word or phrase that immediately stops any intense angelic activity. Kathryn used spiritual cooling protocol activated. Simple? Yes. Effective? Absolutely. But here's what Kathryn learned is crucial. You need to practice these steps before you need them. It's like a fire extinguisher. You don't learn to use it during the fire. Kathryn recommended practicing the protocol once a week, even when everything was calm. That way, if angelic proximity became intense, her response would be automatic. And it worked. Not only for Kathryn, but for all the ministers she discreetly taught. But here's the plot twist no one expected. After Kathryn established these boundaries, something extraordinary happened. The angels didn't move away. They drew even closer, but this time, as partners, not as controllers. The quality of Kathryn's angelic interaction changed completely. Instead of chaotic and overwhelming experiences, she began to have conscious and deliberate angelic collaborations. The miracles at her services became more powerful, not less, because now there was a true partnership between the heavenly and earthly realms. Kathryn discovered that angels actually prefer to work with humans who exercise mature spiritual authority. It's more efficient. It's more satisfying for them. It's like the difference between being ordered to do something and being invited to be part of an important project. And then Kathryn understood why God had allowed that terrible crisis. Not to scare her or punish her, but to teach her something that would revolutionize her entire ministry. That the ultimate goal of spirituality is not dependence, but mature partnership. It's not about being directed by the divine, but governing alongside the divine. And the angels are waiting for more humans to discover this. They are waiting for partners, not puppets. But there's one last secret Kathryn told me. A secret about the white feathers that will completely change how you see them. The white feathers are not gifts from angels. They are business cards. Each feather is a specific angel introducing itself for potential collaboration. And when you find too many feathers, it means too many angels are trying to introduce themselves at the same time. It's like receiving 50 business cards in one day, even if they're from wonderful people. It's overwhelming. Kathryn's protocol teaches the angels to queue, to introduce themselves one at a time, to wait for your response before approaching. And do you know what the most surprising result of all this was? Kathryn stopped finding random white feathers, but she started finding them exactly when she needed specific confirmation. The feathers became answers, not intrusions, intentional signals, not spiritual accidents. And that changed everything. In the last years of Kathryn's life, she said she had discovered the secret that all the great mystics knew, but few taught. That mature spirituality is not about experiencing the maximum number of phenomena possible. It's about experiencing the right phenomena at the right time in the right way. It's about quality, not quantity. It's about conscious partnership, not passive dependence. And when you learn this, when you really understand this, the white feathers stop being signs of danger and become invitations to dance with the divine, but always on your terms, always with your authority respected, always as a partner, never as a subordinate. So, The next time you find white feathers after praying Psalm 91, remember Kathryn's words. Angel who presents yourself welcome. But remember, this is a partnership, not a takeover. And if the feathers start appearing too much, you now know what to do. You activate the protocol. You establish boundaries. You exercise your spiritual authority, not for lack of faith, but for an abundance of wisdom, not to push away the divine, but to dance with it in the way you both deserve, as partners, as collaborators, as family, because in the end that's what Kathryn discovered God always wanted. Not obedient servants, but mature children who know how to govern alongside the Father. And the angels? They've been waiting for centuries to work with humans like that. Humans who know how to say yes, but who also know how to say no. Humans who know when to open the door and when to keep a little distance. Humans who understood that even in the spiritual realm, boundaries are an act of love. Maybe it's time for you to become one of those humans. Maybe it's time for you to stop being visited by angels and start collaborating with them. The white feathers are waiting for your answer. What answer will you give?